Hey Bozo. I used to think that I was the main character. Sickness, poison, pain. I thought I could withstand anything life threw at me. It was only recently that I realized I was no exception. There's a kind of morbid curiosity around the genre of body horror. It's fascinating to see the indomitable human spirit be warped and shaped like Play-Doh. Something so sacred and immutable, yet so easily twisted to serve an abominable purpose. In all of fiction, there are few factions that embody this corruption better than Halo's Flood and Magic the Gathering's Phyrexians. So today, we will put them head to head. As the Galactic Scourge faces off against legions of biomechanical horror, we ask ourselves, who will win? The Phyrexians or the Flood? Cold, calculating corruption. The kind of machinations that skitters past your peripherals, that quietly festers in places that you can't see, that slowly but surely modifies, improves, and completes you. These are the Phyrexians. Thousands of years ago, a man named Yawgmoth sought to obtain perfection. He believed that the human body can be improved through the use of technology, and thus he began to modify the world around him. Pristine landscapes and untouched vistas began to bleed an oily blood. Towering smokestacks blackened the atmosphere with noxious gases, choking out natural life and smothering entire rebellions. The denizens of the plane were reconstructed into monstrous amalgamations of steel and flesh, forming cults of heretical fanatics, hordes of vicious beasts, and massive constructs that trembled the earth. Yawgmoth's influence and power grew to the point where he basically controlled the entire plane, and so he set his sights further. He embedded a single purpose into each abomination to spread his perfection to all corners of the multiverse. By doing this, he unified the melting pot that was Phyrexia under a single banner. No longer a hodgepodge of conflicting interests, now a single-minded engine of war. Various innovations were made as they prepared for their invasion, each one more insidious than the last. Sleeper agents were indistinguishable from regular people, and were disseminated into enemy organizations with the goal to gain more authority, sabotage key operations, and assassinate individuals in positions of power. An entire pocket dimension was created as a staging ground for the upcoming incursion, and war fleets of massive portal ships were assembled to lead the charge. The most important and effective innovation was known as glistening oil. It was made of oil that was mixed with a powerful nanotechnology. It was capable of self-replicating, could infect organic and inorganic material, and from that could convert or create new Phyrexians. In essence, glistening oil was a Grey Goo scenario, where a single drop could doom an entire world. Hello, this is a small interlude that allows me to switch out the soundtrack. If you are enjoying this video so far, physical trauma that subscribe button so that I may harden in response. Oh, I'm gooing it. I've grey gooed all over the wall. The armies of Phyrexia were vast, versatile, and terrifying. Immense industrial complexes and oceans of glistening oil churned forth scores of warriors and abominations. Large portions of the plane were terraformed into refineries and production districts, complete with ammunition dumps the size of whole cities. To call the pocket dimension from earlier a staging ground is to do it a disservice. It was a staging planet that stored waves upon waves of continent-spanning death. Utilizing this titanic manufacturing base, Phyrexia's troops diversified into a variety of roles. Undead swarms were artificially reanimated, scouring life merely through touch. Specialized androids were bred to infiltrate, assault, and sow chaos inside enemy lines. Giant biomechanical beasts spewed forth engineered plagues and inhuman pathogens, while minuscule rodents were converted into biological bombs. Dragon engines flew overhead, possessing the speed and strength of their organic counterparts without the downsides of fatigue or fear. While they dominated the sky, gargantuan dreadnoughts trembled the earth, walking alongside hulking colossi that left entire battlefields as flattened rubble. In terms of weapons, the Phyrexian arsenal is as varied as its inhabitants. Typical weapons like swords, axes, and spears were used in hit-and-run and phalanx tactics. Mechanical horrors can tear you apart with metallic claws and grinding teeth, while bombards shot forth munitions of molten slag, potent acids, and pure mana. A vast armada of spaceship-like cruisers and battleships attacked with batteries of laser weapons, often accompanied by dagger boats and plague ships that impact like manually piloted torpedoes. There were organizations as well. Various cults of vat priests created, repaired, and revived damaged constructs. Knight orders of Phyrexian paladins acted as elite shock troops, and guilds of artisans augmented and improved upon already existing designs. The strongest of the Phyrexians consisted of demons, pneumagogs, and Yawgmoth himself. Demons commanded powerful abilities and had insane physical stats. They could attack the mind and soul of an individual, causing them to hallucinate and attack their allies. If that doesn't work, they have the regeneration, speed, and strength to fight named characters to a standstill. For example, the demon Gix fought evenly with the planeswalker Urza, who could warp reality, manipulate time, and level whole countries with a thought. Pneumagogs are Phyrexia's twisted interpretation of angels. In a plane whose sole purpose was to strive for perfection, they were the most perfect. Amongst all of Yawgmoth's creations, they alone achieved harmony between steel and flesh and soul. Their physical stats are impressive, they number in the thousands and act with perfect coordination. Among the denizens of Phyrexia, they were amongst the most dangerous, the most powerful, and the most beautiful. Finally, Yawgmoth's power was, in simple terms, godlike. Over thousands of years of growth and experimentation, he had become an entity that few in Magic's history could match. He could transform forests into a shambling army 100 million strong, and create beasts from the biomes themselves. Horrific spells were cast at a worldwide scale, as across the globe, artifacts crumpled and failed, corpses rose from their graves, and armies were obliterated into dust. In the end, he became a black cloud that sowed death to all it touched. His form covered the atmosphere and blotted out the sun. In the literal sense, all the world was within his grasp. Now all he needed to do was tighten his grip. Before we move on to the Flood, I think it's really wholesome that the author of the Invasion cycle thanked each character in the story around Phyrexia. It kinda reminds me of those behind-the-scenes clips of Monsters Inc. and Toy Story. I assure you that after the video, Yawgmoth and the Gravemind went to eat Korean barbecue. That or they barbecued Korea. The end of my world started with the gentle landing of a single spore. It was a good spot, filled with the nutrients needed for growth. It spread its roots quickly. It trampled over rocks, unstoppable. And finally, it bloomed, apocalyptic. It was the Flood. Long ago, an ancient godlike race called the Precursors were massacred. Seeking to avoid total extinction, a few survivors ground themselves into dust and spread out amongst the stars. Under the right conditions, their bodies would be able to regenerate, hopefully in a time and place far enough away from those that do them harm. Unfortunately, the Void is not so kind, as over time, this god powder would be corrupted, deteriorating into what we know as the early stages of the Flood. These now hostile particles were capable of manipulating the genetic code of the creatures they come in contact with, slowly warping their minds and bodies into malformed monstrosities. At first, it was minor changes in behavior, and then it was fleshy growths and elongated limbs. Soon, it was full-scale war. Entire planets were assimilated and quarantined before measures suitable for handling diseases were attempted and failed. The races of the galaxy had treated it like a virus. Their response was too slow and discovered too late about its horrific abilities. The infection would make you stronger and more resilient to damage, allowing you to shrug off injuries that would normally prove fatal. The Flood would get stronger and more intelligent as more and more bodies were collected, eventually coalescing into a hive mind that coordinates the swarm. Once established, they begin to terraform the environment around them, making the atmosphere toxic and pumping out spore clouds that can infect you once inhaled. Even artificial intelligences were not safe, as Flood-controlled logic plagues can infect inorganic beings and cause them to turn on their allies. By far the most terrifying ability is their uncaring assimilation of knowledge. Every mind lost to the Flood forfeits all ideas, skills, and data. Kill a pilot and you gain proficiency in their ships and weapon systems. Kill a scientist and you can modify and neutralize their tech. Kill a commander and suddenly all their tactics become useless. Even if you don't possess new knowledge, a being's added biomass and intelligence combines with the Flood's, making it smarter and more deadly. At the height of their power, the Flood had assimilated trillions, creating neural networks the size of whole planets. We'll go over what that entails later, but know that this granted the Galactic Scourge near omniscience, able to contend with and even outperform the strongest of supercomputers and AI. Flood organisms come in a menagerie of specialized forms. There are likely thousands of undocumented Flood variations, but we can categorize each one based on their role in the swarm. Infection forms attack in large groups, can liquefy and rearrange organic matter upon contact, and can take control of uninfected hosts. Combat forms can operate vehicles and wield weapons, or attack with whip-like tentacles and hardened claws. Carrier forms act as biological landmines, carpet bombers, and factories, releasing poisons, spores, and parasites that further the spread of infection. Pure forms do not need a host. They are generally tougher and more deadly than typical Flood, acting as biological tanks, snipers, and assassins. In a sense, each form acts like a chess piece. Individually, they may have limited capabilities, but taken as a whole, the swarm becomes a force to be reckoned with. And the one at the helm, the one that controls the board, is known as the Gravemind. Once enough bodies have been amassed, a colossal Flood form is created, and as more and more bodies are infected, that organism keeps growing with no limit. It starts off as the bulbous proto-Gravemind, grows into the massive regular Gravemind, and finally to the planet-sized Keyminds. As mentioned earlier, the Gravemind commands an insane intellect, able to coordinate engagements across an interstellar battlefield. Imagine that, the information from trillions of eyes, used to control billions of hordes, across 1 million battlefields and 1,000 worlds. Imagine playing in that game of chess. The final and most impressive part of the Flood is the technologies they have access to. Over multiple millennia, they have waged war against highly advanced civilizations, hoarding a veritable arsenal of guns, ships, and tools. Infantry weapons can fire typical projectiles, laser and plasma bolts, and rounds of antimatter. Advanced armor systems like active camouflage, energy shields, and assistant AI make specific hosts a kill-on-sight threat. Spacefaring vessels can melt the surfaces of planets and cause stars to supernova, allowing the Flood to genocide whole star systems. Using slipspace technologies, their fleets can travel thousands of light years in mere hours. and with their vast intelligence, they could outmaneuver opponents on a galactic scale. Their greatest weapon is unlocked when they reach a critical mass, usually marked by the creation of a key mind. Often, I've alluded to the Flood's mental capacity as a key strength, but aside from a strategic standpoint, it doesn't really offer much of an advantage. That is, until we consider neural physics. You see, the universe of Halo can be viewed as a living organism, one that can be harnessed, leashed, and controlled. Once the Flood achieved a certain level of omniscience, they gained the ability to bend reality itself. They could conjure matter out of thin air, skew space-time to suppress faster-than-light travel, and disable enemy tech on a planetary scale. Perhaps the most famous example of neural physics was the Flood's usage of the star roads, astronomical filaments that were miles thick and light years long. They were impervious to all conventional weaponry, changed their mass at will, moved at the speed of light, and could crush entire planets. In the end, all sentient life in the galaxy was erased in order to stop the Flood. Not kill, mind you, just delay. Now that we've covered their abilities, we can start to compare the two factions. To do this, I want to try a new format. Instead of giving a final answer right away, I want to split the battle into different tiers, escalating the fight from their base forms to an all-out conflict. That way, I can showcase all of their abilities, instead of just using the strongest attacks from the get-go. This may be the smallest tier of escalation, but it answers an important question. Which is better, the Flood infection or glistening oil? The two are oddly similar. They both have some means of self-propagation, can snowball into an apocalypse if left unchecked, and, weirdly enough, both are weak to halos. Different types, mind you, the halo array that cleansed the galaxy and the divine power of angels, but it's a nice similarity. If we planted both onto a planet and left it undisturbed, which one would come out on top? The Flood conversion process is much faster, but Phyrexias is a one-way trip. It turns the organic into inorganic, cutting off organisms from the Flood. It can also act like a mechanical immune system, retroactively converting nerve cells after a Flood infection form converts a Phyrexian. Being mechanical, there's no way for the Flood to hijack it either. In other words, glistening oil can prevent and counter a Flood infection, but not the other way around. Glistening oil is also a lot more versatile, able to make use of places devoid of life. If the planet was barren and sterile, the Flood would flounder without a host, while the Phyrexians would still be able to prosper. Because it is more versatile and a natural counter to the Flood, the Phyrexians take the first round. What would happen if a squad of Phyrexian soldiers were to engage a Flood horde? Coming across a decrepit city center, a small detachment finds that it is far from abandoned. The rank-and-file soldiers of the Phyrexians are far stronger than a normal human, due to their augments. Their coordination is good, and not one of them backs down in fear. The result is a total annihilation, and a total victory for the Flood. See, the Flood is all that and more. Combat forms are reinforced and don't die from typically fatal wounds. They attack in perfect unison due to the hive mind, and they can fight and revive as long as there is enough biomatter. They also vastly outnumber the Phyrexians. At the height of their power, the Phyrexians numbered in the billions, while the Flood infected trillions to quadrillions of beings. This is 1,000 to 1 odds or worse, more than enough to create a gravemind able to coordinate and outplay typical formations. At this scale, the Flood wins convincingly. This is our first large-scale engagement, with both armies bringing artillery and aerial support. Just like before, the Flood vastly outnumbers the Phyrexians, but in terms of total mass, the Phyrexians actually pull ahead. Giant constructs can eclipse the size of mountains, a scale that challenges smaller capital ships. Even with the improved coordination that the higher flood count brings, this is not enough to fell these constructs. The Flood would be able to amass biomatter and combine into a combat form of comparable size, but the difference in scale would mean that they would forfeit the numbers advantage. Concentrated fire from artillery and infantry guns won't be able to take them down, as they can regenerate and burrow under the earth, and the Logic Plague would fail to turn them, as they are too single-minded and lack the sentience required for infection. The Flood does have impressive aerial support, sporting firepower that can level cities, but they would be hard-pressed to take out these constructs while dealing with return fire. It would be a hard fight, but the overwhelming power of Phyrexian dreadnoughts makes up for the difference in numbers. In the final round, we pull out all the stops. Here, the strongest abilities of each faction will clash in an interplanar war. Namely, it will be the god of death Yawgmoth versus the advanced tech and neural physics of the Gravemind. First, to call Yawgmoth a one-man army is an understatement. He would immediately overturn the numbers advantage in favor of the Phyrexians. Whole armies would be launched into disarray as the ground beneath their feet become mudmen and golems. The Flood's response would originate from the void. Orbital ships and war fleets would turn their guns downwards, and death would rain down from the heavens. These ships make even the largest of Phyrexian constructs look like plastic toys. Planets would burn, and armies would be obliterated. Smoke rises from the blackened continents, nothing remaining but dust. The smoke brushed against the massive capital ships, and one by one, they died. The black cloud that was Yawgmoth had covered the world in minutes, and was only speeding up. More and more war fleets blinked out of slipspace, and lances of light struck out at nearby stars. Each one would blaze spectacularly, destroying massive swaths of the galaxy until nothing but blackness remained. A moment later, the blackness doubled. And so, it would come down to this: the collective power of multiple keymines working alongside the star roads against the god of death himself. Massive tears of unreality would appear and disappear as space itself would rupture. In a clash of two galactic threats, Yawgmoth would come out on top. Neural constructs like the star roads might have the ability to rewrite the laws of physics and wreak havoc on space-time itself, but Yawgmoth scales the characters with feats much greater than that. Commodore Guff could predict the future by reading a book containing his own narrative, breaking the fourth wall by literally erasing out possible futures. Freyalise cast the World spell, overcoming a force that was holding multiple universes together. This invisible force, which had separated multiple planes from the wider multiverse, was itself a byproduct of one of Urza's attacks. It took the combined force of 9 planeswalkers of similar caliber, plus countless powerful artifacts, to take down Yawgmoth, a power that the Flood, even with its vast knowledge and godlike technologies, would not be able to handle. In an all-out galactic battle to the death, Yawgmoth and the Phyrexians would win. The final part is a collection of thoughts and hypotheticals that I've omitted from the main conclusion. The most glaring difference in this matchup would be the presence of a multiverse in Magic versus the singular universe of Halo. This provides an immense advantage to the Phyrexians because it enforces a glass ceiling. If there is anything that could affect 2 universes or more, then it would automatically be better than everything in Halo, as it only has one universe to play with. Even the very concept of traveling between universes or planeswalking tips the scale in favor of the Phyrexians. What's stopping them from continuously sending troops against a foe with no means to invade back? You might think that the Star Roads could prevent that, or that Flood Spores could infiltrate through a two-way portal, but Phyrexia doesn't need to play by the rules. They could create a new universe, put their troops in it, and smash the 2 universes together, completely separate from their home plane. The Star Roads can't cover everything, the trip is one way, and the Phyrexians control when and where the fighting occurs. Repeat this enough times, and eventually the flood will buckle. I am hard set in the final conclusion that the Phyrexians would win an all-out war, but the third fight, the planetary round, was more of a toss-up. With their advanced tech, even the smaller vehicles pack a considerable punch, probably enough to put the dreadnoughts of Phyrexia in jeopardy. In the ground game, the Phyrexians would absolutely dominate, but the battle would ultimately be won by the faction that achieves air superiority. In a coin flip scenario, I sided with the Phyrexians to lead you to think that the winner would actually be the Flood, which would make the Phyrexian win a bit more shocking. For the cellular tier, I want to mention the speed difference. Before, I said that the Flood infection process was much faster, but in actuality, it's much closer than you think. Yes, a Flood infection form does its job in under a minute, but originally, the precursor dust took hundreds of years to take hold. I omitted this point because you could just use Flood spores instead, but it is something to note. I admit, Yawgmoth is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this matchup. If you scroll down, you'll probably see a comment that goes Flood vs Phyrexia red crossout emoji, Flood vs Yawgmoth green tick emoji. I'm not gonna lie, it just takes that much to scale up to the Flood at the height of their power. Because of their long history and retention of knowledge, you aren't fighting the Flood. You are actually fighting the entirety of the Halo franchise. They have access to godlike tech from the most dominant factions in Halo, and the only way to match that was to have a god fight back. Take away the technology and the Flood scales much lower, but to do that would be to undersell their capabilities. I left this point last because the majority of people would have clicked off by now. I think it's very obvious that I have some bias. I've lovingly played Magic for more than a decade and was able to download PDFs of some of its books. In contrast, I didn't grow up playing Halo, and my sources consisted of forums, wikis, and YouTube deep dives. There's likely some snippets in the books and dialogues in the game that could raise the power level of the Flood, maybe to the point where they could win overall. Even the matchup would seem rigged, as I picked the one swarm in Magic lore that fights with mechanical troops to go up against the Flood, which mostly relies on biological hosts. In reality, there isn't enough lore around the slivers, and I've already done a video on the Eldrazi. I could have done New Phyrexia versus the weaker modern Flood, but I wanted to go big. Regardless of who you support, just know that Squee wins. Later, Bozo.